everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Yellow Tape. This one is really exciting, something that we never touched on, and I had no idea that a field like this also exists in forensics. Um, so I will let Julian introduce our guest for today, and over to you, Julian.
All right, so today we have Chelsea Tyre of Ideal Innovations Inc. She's a senior examination trainer of the Face Center of Excellence. So we're gonna just go into a deep dive into biometrics, what's a biometric examiner, face ID, face recognition, face comparison, twins, double gangers, similarities, this, that. There's so much that we get into, and I really feel it's a niche topic that I doubt that you guys have really heard of anywhere else. So let's get into it. But before that, guys, don't forget to like
Share and
and
subscribe to our
subscribe.
channel.
Let's get it.
One of the first questions that comes into my mind, keeping in mind your experience, would you mind explaining us what biometrics mean?
Sure. So, biometrics are like physical characteristics or kind of like personal behavior traits that are used to recognize the identity or verify the identity of someone. So, like, kind of the science behind using a person's biological characteristics to identify them, like facial images, fingerprints, iris scans, things like that.
So it's not DNA, but it's more physical characteristics of the person.
Right. Either physical characteristics or like those behavioral traits like voice, like speech or handwriting, typing, I've also seen as well, things like that.
Like typing, like if I'm texting someone, that kind of texting typing?
Like typing, more so, I haven't seen as much typing as I've seen handwriting because handwriting is
Mm,
like a newer thing, of course, with like the way that you actually physically are writing. Typing, I've not seen as much of, but I have heard of that being used. Yeah, and definitely speech, like voice, as well. Yeah.
that makes sense. So it's pretty much like I guess your thumbprint, but like your personality thumbprint, I guess if that's the right word.
Yeah, for those types. As far as like the biometrics that normally would come to mind for people, it would be those physical characteristics, as in your actual fingerprints, like your thumbprint. Each of your fingers has a different print.
Right.
So any of your fingerprints or your face image, if you had an iris scan, something like that.
Gotcha. So what exactly is a biometric examiner then?
So, as biometric examiners, we would compare the different modalities. So, for instance, when I was a biometric examiner, or in the capacity that I am now, we compare 10 prints, so your fingerprints. We also compare faces, so face images, like a one-to-one face, or iris images as well. Sometimes we have all three modalities. Sometimes we only have two. We may have like the fingerprints in the face. We may only have irises. So just depending on what we have to look at.
Okay.
What kind of cases do you usually deal with when you're looking at iris exams? Or I don't know.
What type of, I'm sorry, what was the first
What
part?
kind of cases do you come across when you have to look at the iris?
It just depends as far as irises. Sometimes we'll get them in, I'm trying to be careful of how I answer this. So sometimes we get them in if the data collection has an iris image in it. So if the person is collecting iris images, then we would get that in that type of case. And then we would use that against we would put our unknown in and look at that against our known set of images from the database that we have to look at the irises. I don't know if that exactly answered your question on that one, but
That makes sense.
okay.
So for fingerprints, like I've heard, there is a way of comparison, like the standards, which is like the A suite.
Sure.
You look at different points, you try to match the minutiae and things like that. How is it, uh, what kind of extrapolation do you have when you do facial recognition or identification?
So as far as faces are different from fingerprints because they're not static like fingerprints are, right? So as I'm talking to you right now, I'm probably making like 20 different facial expressions, right? So I'm changing my face, I'm smiling, I'm talking, the muscle movement is going. So that obviously changes things on the face. So it changes some of the stability of features. However, when we do compare faces, we are still using ACE-V. So we still use ACE-V, which I watched your video on you explaining ACE-V, and you did beautifully, by the way. It was wonderful. I was like, I wish I could copy and paste that right into my brain to explain to people. But yeah, we still utilize ACE-V in face comparisons, but obviously there are some nuances that are different just because, like I said, they're not faces aren't static like fingerprints are. But yeah.
Gotcha. That's nice. So I guess shifting gears a little bit. The face center of excellence. Can you please explain to us what that is?
Sure. So the Face Center of Excellence, we have different services that we provide. We do training. So we do facial identification training. We have different courses that are different levels of detail, essentially. So we have virtual courses and in-person classes. We go from anywhere from like a 4-hour kind of high level overview all the way to a 40-hour in-person class where we really get into like deeper nuances of like documentation, more comparisons and things like that. And then we also have some refresher courses for like comparing juvenile images, population variations, so variations with different populations, and expert witness testimony course as well. So that's kind of one of the pillars of the Face Center of Excellence. We also have a few more. We have a facial identification proficiency test. So we partner with Collaboration Testing Services, CTS, I'm sure you're probably aware of them, to provide a facial identification proficiency test. We also do expert witness services. So that's kind of to provide like consulting services for prosecution, defense attorneys, private citizens, folks like that. We also have on-demand comparison consulting, and that's kind of geared towards civilian and military law enforcement for those kinds of consulting jobs.
A lot of
Gotcha.
things you guys do. That's so
And
Yeah, a lot of things we do. Yeah.
long list.
Yeah, sorry.
No, it's
and those
also interesting. Oh my God.
Yeah.
that's cool. And those classes, are you like when you're doing like I guess like a facial comparison in those classes, is it like picture to picture, video to video? Like how is I guess a quick rundown on how like you might compare, how something in that class might go.
Yeah, of course. So actually, we start with a pretest to kind of gauge where you're at. We make sure that the participant is not face blind as well or having prosopagnosia, because that is a thing that
You're
can
gonna have to
happen.
define that. I'm sorry.
So that's a person that is face blind. So someone that it does not have the ability to actually recognize faces. So they might see you in a crowd and not recognize you, like someone that, maybe your coworker that you work with and perhaps they don't recognize.
I'm just ignoring them. It's a little different.
Yeah, you're just right. Yeah, just use that as an excuse next time. I'm face blind. I didn't know.
Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah,
That's
so
crazy. I didn't know that.
yeah, so we do a little pretest, kind of see where you're at, just kind of gauge that. And then we actually go through, of course, we go through to the different agencies and organizations with the discipline. We go through history, kind of timeline of history of facial identification. We go through, I'm trying to think off the cuff, the comparison methodologies like ACE-V, things like that, what a facial recognition system is and the limitations. And then we start going through each feature of the face. So a lot of people think of like nose, ears, eyes, mouth, right? But there are actually 18 features that we compare on the face and head. So we go through every single one of those, and there are, as far as the ears, nose, mouth, some of those bigger, like more global features, we go through and do actually take them out. We like crop them down so that you're just comparing those to kind of be able to go through and look at each feature in isolation. And that kind of teaches you not to look at the face holistically, but that you're ensuring that you are actually going through and looking at each feature, doing a morphological analysis on the face. And so we go through and actually look at every feature. And then we kind of go over the stability and some things that can affect the face, and so a lot of other information as well. And then we have comparisons of the full face at the end. So kind of then you get to really you get to see the difference in when you started the class, looking at the face, probably kind of guessing, kind of going with your gut a little bit, kind of looking at the face holistically and saying, they look a little bit similar, or yeah, they're probably the same, or whatever, to the end where you really are, picking out those features and you're seeing things that you really didn't see at the beginning, and actually doing that comparison.
Wow.
Oh.
Yeah. Sorry, there's a lot of detail, but
No, that's so after that class, you either think everyone is like beautiful or everyone is ugly then.
it teaches you, I will say this discipline teaches you a lot about yourself, because I felt like I look in the mirror and I'm like, oh wow, look at all those frontal lines I have, and look at my vertical glabellar lines, and I'm looking at all of these things in my face where I'm like, oh goodness. But you do start to look at other people's faces. I'll have people in classes say, I was staring at my husband's ears last night, looking at the shape of the concha, or how big his lobes were. So, yeah.
Jeez.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a tough job, because there would be people, like cases that you would be working on for facial recognition, but they would have gone through like surgeries and things like that. And can you
Exactly.
then does the task become even more difficult, or do you have ways to walk around with those situations?
Yeah, so it absolutely does. Of course, like there are, different things where someone may have had, some sort of plastic surgery or cosmetic surgery, or I mean, there are a lot of things that can affect the stability of a face. There are also, like I said before, I think I mentioned expression changes. But there is also aging, that muscle movement reaction, creating those more fine lines and wrinkles, deepening those creases, things like that. You also have differences in weight. If you have a huge observable weight loss or weight gain, or intentional alterations, things, there's a lot of different things that can affect time-related changes. But I think some ways to go about that are we look at the stability, we go over what features are maybe more stable than other features. So what would you put more weight on than another? For example, the mouth, as I'm talking and under expression, my mouth is going to change the most, right? Like my mouth is moving a lot. Whereas if you could see my ears, which surely you can't now, but my ears really aren't going to move when I'm making different expressions or things like that. So ears are actually a lot more stable. As far as plastic surgery goes, if it was a case where we had the opportunity to go back and say, hey, did your client, like, was there any plastic surgery done maybe, or something like that, or saying, maybe giving them, maybe from our evidence, we concluded that it was not the same person. And then they came back and said, hey, actually, our client had a rhinoplasty or a nose job. Would you be interested in that? Of course we would. We would love the before and after photos to be able to then make that conclusion that it came from a common source. So yeah, if we have the means to be able to ask for more images or something like of that nature, that can help sometimes as well.
That's
Very much. Oh, is it me next? Okay, so
Out for a second.
no, he can't see us, so that's the problem.
Oh no, oh, that's the worst.
So he got to say something for him to realize
blind.
That's awful.
Also, what was the word for facial blindness again? The condition?
Prosopagnosia.
Rosopagnosia?
Yes, I can send it to you if you want to.
Sure, that'd be great. It's a word I never heard before.
Never heard.
Um, so I guess how do you build a Jesus, a facial recognition software? Like how does that I don't know, how do you do that?
Yeah, so we actually don't um we don't build facial recognition
Hmm.
systems, so I couldn't exactly tell you. I could tell you how a facial recognition system works.
Right,
Um,
right.
as far as like you would put in your we would either call it a sometimes it's called a probe or maybe your unknown image right into the system into the facial recognition system, and it would rank by computer evaluated similarity. It would run through that algorithm, and then it would produce a list of candidates or candidate list, and that would be in that kind of evaluated similarity. And so then we would go through and actually compare each of those images, from the unknown to the known from that database of known images.
Right.
Is it
Does
manual or through computer?
A facial recognition system
Yeah.
is going to be an automated. It's going to be not a manual. It would be an automated search of those. Yeah, an automated searching of a facial image in a biometric database. So typically, um, in that database, you would have your all of your known images, and it would go through and it would pull whatever the threshold is set to. So say you had it set to pull 5 images maybe, or you had it set to pull 20. You could set it based on that of how many you want it to look at, as far as like doing a one to many comparison, or it could be based off of score. So whatever the score threshold is how many
mm,
candidates you may have to look at to compare.
right. Do you is there a difference, do you think, that like I guess between the human eye and the computer? Like if I say these two people look alike, but is the computer going to say these two people look alike?
Yeah, I do think there's a difference because humans, we can perceive some different things that a facial recognition system maybe can't. So, for instance, expression changes or pose, sometimes things like that, we're able to maybe pick up on a little bit better than that. But also, I think a facial recognition system can be extremely helpful because obviously it can pull. They are getting better all the time. Facial recognition systems are,
Of course.
and more accurate, and so that's great. It can be more difficult on us because it can pull poorer quality images, right? It can, because of the level of detail that it can pull. So sometimes that can
Right.
be a little bit more difficult as well. But I do think that there are details that humans can perceive that facial recognition systems maybe not are able to, or maybe weren't able to, maybe are getting better. But
Right.
So just follow-up question. With so much advancement in technology, with the AI and artificial intelligence, have
yeah.
you seen AI like be a part of the facial recognition system? And if it is, then how is it helping?
Yeah, I think a lot of algorithms for face and for biometrics are starting to use AI. They are becoming, like I said, they're becoming more accurate, but I still think that you need to have that human in the loop. There's research and studies that show that the best collaboration really is with the machine and the human, because obviously we can use, as humans, we can make errors, but as the machine can also make errors as well. We've seen that before. So I think in collaboration, the two together, I think is where you yield the best result, really. Um, yeah.
Just sorry, just one follow-up, then I'll turn back to Julian. So you talked about a facial database. So we have something for like CODIS for DNA. Um,
Sure.
and which sure like the police labs or the labs around official government labs have access to. Is it something similar for facial recognition as well, like a database operated by the government and for the government?
Yeah, it just depends actually. So So there are different algorithms for different uses. So for instance, if you're a law enforcement, if you're law enforcement, you may want an algorithm that has more of those controlled or booking photos, because that's the database that you're going to be searching through, right? If you're maybe it's missing children, maybe you want an algorithm that works better on children, juvenile faces. Or if it's trying to think, if like some sort of intelligence community, you may want an algorithm that scores best with those uncontrolled or surveillance type images.
Sense. So different purposes as different kind of search engines and different
Exactly, or different databases. Exactly. So you might have different states that are allowed to utilize like the DMV photos or something like of that nature. You may have states that aren't and have just maybe mugshots or something of that nature, or just like a known database. You could make a database with you and your whole family, right? Your parents, siblings, children, spouses, friends, whatever, and search against it. So really just whatever database you have to search through, that would be what you are searching the system through.
So just top of my head, if it's an immigration case, then they would be going to the USCIS database where they have the iris and the faces where they can compare it to.
Right. They may need more of that uncontrolled type surveillance, or whatever database really that they have access to, right? So you may have access to utilize a database, whereas some agencies may not have access to use that database.
This is so much fun. Oh my God.
Yeah. I'm glad. It's making me excited.
No, very interesting.
Am I in the wrong field? No.
Come on over to the dark side.
In relation to something you said earlier that made me think about this. So you were talking about how the mouth, I guess, area is the most expressive part of the face as you talk.
Yeah.
And then Nidhi being from India, me being from here, someone even American, me being from like Brooklyn, and someone from being like Florida, Atlanta. Does like maybe slang or the way people pronunciate words as they talk, like, does that come into contact? I imagine if you're looking at like maybe a video of someone compared to another like short video of someone, and they may look similar, but you can tell as they talk, they have maybe their mouth moves in different ways as they, does that play a part into anything? Or is that like I'm just into the woods?
I think that's more so probably you might see that more in like speaker recognition, or like voice kind of thing. As far as for us, we don't do too much. Like I personally don't do too much with video. I'll occasionally get video, mostly, and I'm still extracting images from that video to compare.
Gotcha.
But as far as there are actual structural differences though in people, like your actual skull there are definitely differences. There are differences amongst ethnicities. There are also differences amongst sexes as well. Structurally, like at that bone level, there are differences that we see with different groups.
Just going like a few steps back, would you mind explaining us the difference between facial identification and facial recognition?
Of course, sure. Yeah, so this is a big one. I think we get this question a lot, or we get a lot of confusion surrounding this. A lot of people say, "Oh, you do facial recognition." A lot of my family and friends, if I'm trying to explain my job, and so facial recognition is actually going to be the system, and I think I hit on that earlier, but I'll go back through. So, facial identification is the discipline. So facial identification is actually the discipline of image-based comparisons of human facial features, whereas facial recognition is actually the system. So it's the automated searching of a facial image in a biometric database, like a one-to-many, that typically results in that group or that candidate list that I was kind of talking about, ranked by that computer evaluated similarity. And then I'll throw one more in there for you, but facial image comparison is what we do with what comes out of that, right? So you put your probe in or your unknown image, it runs through that algorithm. It spits out that candidate list of evaluated similarity. What you do then is you're going to do the comparison of the images. Okay, so your unknown to your known image from that database. So that manual process to identify similarities between those two images. You may also have an image to a person. So if I'm, looking at your ID because you're trying to buy alcohol or tobacco or something like that to you, or a law enforcement stop, something like that, to determine if they're the same person or if they're a different person.
Gotcha.
It would be really sad for the person checking the ID if he or she is facially like the blind situation.
Face blind, yeah. For sure. That would be so hard.
It's so much fun, but so sad.
Yeah.
Just get through with it. Oh my God.
There are some people that are
Right.
super recognizers, and their ability to recognize faces is like incredibly high. So they can recognize maybe someone that they saw in the grocery store like once. They
Wow.
can recognize again, seeing them, maybe they see them several weeks later on the street or something. They would be able to recognize their face, which is like crazy.
We call that stalking.
We call that a charge.
So, what are some reasons that you might need to conduct a facial comparison for?
Yeah, so there's some different things. So screening and access control would be one. Law enforcement, intelligence gathering for identity management, and also forensics. There's also a couple different levels of facial image comparison that might be helpful to explain a little bit better. But so I mentioned about the ID, right? So if I had your ID and I was looking at you, that's going to be more of a facial assessment, right? So that's your facial assessor or a facial assessment. That's going to be that like high throughput environment, like your border crossing, your law enforcement traffic stop or something like that nature. Just kind of that quick comparison. And then you have a facial review or a facial reviewer. So that's a human review of that facial recognition system candidate list. So those, maybe 5 that have popped out from when you put it in the FR system to identify whether or not it's the same person, kind of weeding out the nose and then looking a little bit more into the possible common source images. And then a facial examination, that's going to be more of a facial examiner or a facial examination. That's going to be more of your systematic examination process. That's going to be when you use ACE-V when you're trying to determine whether they depict the same person or not. And that's going to be more your intensive, rigorous process that you can reach that forensic analysis.
Wow. Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense.
Just one of the more questions in the same realm. What are some major challenges that you usually face in your field for biometrics and especially dealing with facial comparisons?
Yeah, so I've hit on a couple of them, but some of them would be like the stability of the features. I know I kind of mentioned, of course, they're not the same as fingerprints, which I think, we probably all know by now. But I think also just because of that stability, I know I've already talked about expression, but time-related changes, again, aging, even like elderly aging, so loss of that bone or teeth, like loss of bone or teeth or fat or collagen. Again, that marked weight change, changes in health, any kind of intentional alterations like makeup, tattoos, piercings, things of that nature. Also, I think just a lot of imaging conditions, a lot of the image quality obviously can affect how difficult or how easy a comparison is. Lighting, all kinds of different things that can happen in an image, right? Poor quality images or you might have great quality images where you can see every crease and crevice and everything that's going on with the face. So especially, I think, imaging conditions. I'm trying to think of what else. Our time as a forensic discipline, we're kind of a younger discipline. So as far as faces, so that can be a challenge as well. And our capture system. So we're only as good as the images that we capture, right? The images are, of course, cameras are getting better every day, but
Right.
that's if you have the funds to be able to have those types of computers. And as we probably know, some organizations or agencies may not have the greatest of computers or not computers, sorry, but like cameras to be taking those images.
True.
How do you deal with lookalikes or like identical twin situations?
So there are differences. I mean, don't get me wrong, they're difficult comparisons, especially children. Twins are difficult comparisons. But I think that there are differences that you'll see when you go through the features, especially in the ears. Ears can be really helpful in distinguishing between twins. If you have them, of course, that is, because like if you see me now, you probably aren't able to see my ears. So if you would have taken an image of me right now, maybe my ears would be covered so you wouldn't be able to see them. But that's definitely a feature that we use to distinguish between twins would be ears. But there are usually other differences in other features as well.
Is it true? Just one more question before, sorry.
Yeah.
Is it true like there are 7 lookalike people like ours in the world? Like, do you come across those scenarios?
I don't know. We've thought of like just kind of like trying to do like kind of fun, silly posts of like, like look at our doppelgangers, like our trainer doppelganger type thing, or our celebrity lookalikes, or whatever. And we actually, it's cool. We have a lot of slides where a lot of the celebrities look very similar. Like I don't know if you're familiar, but like Will Ferrell and I think it's the drummer of the Red Hot Chili Peppers, they look very, very similar. If you look up photos of the two of them. But yeah, so I don't know the exact amount or anything like that, but I think, going through that actual morphological analysis and looking at, because like I said, we look at all 18 features, and that sounds like a lot, but it's actually a lot times a lot more because we're actually looking at all of the components of those features. So for instance, the ear, I'm not just looking at the ear as a whole. I'm looking at the shape of the helix, the shape of the anti-helix, the scaphoid fossa, the concha. Like there's all these different parts and pieces of each of those features that we're looking at, the shapes of the relative height or width of things of that nature. So it can be a lot, but it's helpful when we're going through comparisons of lookalikes or twins.
I actually have 2 questions kind of offshoot to that.
Yeah.
One, I guess when you say, now when me and Nidhi might say this, it might hold different weight to when you might say this. But when I guess you say someone looks like someone else, is it like those big like features like forehead, nose, mouth that people tend to like get mixed up, or is it the smaller features like one of the 18 that we don't know that people
Mhm.
tend to get mixed up?
That's a good question. I think that do you mean like examiners or do you mean
Maybe
person?
more like non-examiners. Like if I say I look like this person, am I thinking like we have the same nose or mouth, or is it like there's something going on that they just resemble each other that I don't know what a contour is.
Yeah.
So uh,
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think that I'm not sure, to be honest. I think that that would be different I think that's kind of subjective. I think it might be different for everyone. Maybe like holistically, they think that that person looks similar, just like as a whole, or maybe it's the mannerisms that they think look similar. Maybe the way that someone talks or the way they laugh or something like that could be like, oh wow, you kind of look like that person, or you remind me of this person. But as far as like actual features of lookalikes, I'm not 100% sure. I think like maybe they probably pick out, if I had to guess, like probably one thing, like you said, like your nose or the mouth or eyes, like, oh well, they look similar, right? But I would venture to guess kind of like holistically, they probably think they looked similar.
No, that makes sense. That makes sense. And is the I feel like people always look so much different over time. Like, is the can the I guess the software can it pick up like? Because I feel like the human eye may not even be good at picking up like someone who's 25 and someone who's 35. It may be the same person, but if they got arrested at 25 and then you catch a picture of them at 35, can they see the resemblance in that?
As far as we don't utilize a facial recognition system in our training or our services that I mentioned earlier, like expert
Hmm.
witness or things of that nature. But as far as the time that I have worked with a FR system, getting they are getting a lot better, and they are able to pull a lot of things like that. But also, if you have, sometimes we're just provided two images, right? We're provided that image of them at 25 and that image of them 30 years later. I think that's the example you used. Sorry if I messed that up, but
Very good.
the we may just be provided those two images to have to compare. But as far as the FR system, I believe, just kind of off the cuff, I would say yes, it would be able to. It obviously depends on a lot of things: pose, lighting, image quality. Is there, resolution? Is there like differences? Is there differences in sharpness or things like that? Noise going on. But yeah, I would venture to say that it would be able to.
Right. Last one. Sorry, I just keep
No,
interested. Are there like
all at it all night.
are there like with the age question, are there like inferences you as an examiner can make to be like, well, faces usually do this over time, so I believe that this may be the same person. Not in those words, but you know.
Yeah, of course. So yeah, there actually are. There's some research done for the stability. There's actually a document at FISWIG, which is the Facial Identification Scientific Working Group, has a physical stability of facial features of adults. There's a document there that we follow in our training as well as in our work. But a lot of research done behind what is the actual stability of those different features under those five factors that I mentioned earlier. So expression, change in expression, anything that's a deviation from a neutral expression, which would be your mouth closed and your eyes open. The differences in, trying to go through them all. Time, so short term, which is 5 years or less.
Mm.
Long term is in excess of 5 years. And then there's observable weight change. I'm trying to think of what the fourth one is off the top of my head. Observable weight change. There's also intentional alterations and changes in health is the other one. So I'm not sure that I hit your actual question, but there's a lot of research done around stability of those features of how they would move. Just a couple little insider tricks that we would use that I'll share with you would be,
Mm.
you're familiar with your own face, right? So you probably look at your own face a good bit. So kind of using a mirror or maybe your phone to look at, if I change my expression to the same expression, is that changing what that feature looks like? Right. So kind of using a mirror to see, does that change that if I'm at a certain pose or if I am making that certain expression?
Right.
So things like that. And also flipping both images upside down will trick your brain into looking at the actual shapes of the features and not looking at the pictures of
Mm.
the photos holistically.
Mm.
Oh,
That can
very
be
That
helpful.
makes sense.
so interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Fun
Um,
little facts for your Wednesday.
we also have like the stupid online tools where you can like put in your photo and like drag and see as to how you're aging with time,
Yeah, yeah.
which is crazy. Like,
Yeah,
I
exactly.
wish I
Yeah.
could just go back in time.
Yeah. There's actually a lot. I have some friends that work in doing like art, the forensic art, and I have some friends that do like the actual progression, the age progression photos and things like that, where maybe they only have some images or images of family to help go off of, or maybe they only have the skull or something like that to go off of. So kind of progressing from there, they kind of look at to see how their siblings maybe aged or how their parents aged. That of course is not in my expertise, but those are things that I've learned in conversation or kind of talks with them, hearing talks from them.
Just to come back to the amount of like different fields that you guys hit when you're working with facial recognition, how do you deal with privacy concerns while ensuring like public safety when you're working with the biometric systems?
So I would say that that's probably outside of my realm. But as far as what we do for training wise, we definitely push the responsible use of facial recognition systems. We absolutely hammer home that you need to use facial recognition responsibly. You should not just rely on whatever comes out. You should be able to look at it and should be able to compare that unknown image to that known image. You shouldn't just, run through and say, oh, that's our person, we got them. You need to be responsible in the use of that. As far as like privacy and things of that nature, we don't so much as deal with the decisions behind those kinds of things, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah. So now like coming back to now if you have all this evidence that you compared through different systems and everything, and now it comes time to like, for example, if the case is going on trial, like you're presenting it,
Sure, yeah.
have a score to your image that, oh, I think it's this score that this two images matches. How do you present that evidence in court, and like what does the score signify when you're presenting it?
Yeah, so it depends. I think as far as how the evidence is presented, I have not personally testified. We have folks on our team that have. I would assume essentially, I mean, it is essentially the same as other evidence, right? So you would need to qualify as an expert, provide basis for your opinion, give your opinion, also to show the demonstration of what you saw or you didn't see, right? So what it is that you saw, documenting what you saw to come to that decision. I believe you should also seek to kind of disprove yourself or look to falsify whatever you've seen as well. But I believe it would be similar to other fields where you would need to have those things. As far as documentation of like the score and things like that, I would say that there are documents for facial identification as far as what the minimum requirements for documentation. So that's kind of more agency specific. If you have certain things that you would put in, certain things that you would include in your report. For instance, if you did use an FR system, what the algorithm was that you utilized, what the score was, maybe things like that you would need to include. Whereas we would not put it in an FR system. We would just look at the images. So of course we would probably include things like maybe date received or what the images were, or maybe any kind of screenshots or anything that we did to show and documentation to show how we came to that opinion.
When I think of this field, I usually think that, oh, there's facial recognition comparisons. It's like a starting off point for a case, right? And then you build the case to my understanding, rather than it being the main basis for the case solving. I think it helps.
Absolutely. I agree. So I would think, you have your unknown image, and it's a tool, in my opinion, to utilize in helping, right? It would take you hours and days and years of your life to go through tens of thousands of cards or even images in a computer to look through manually. It would take so much time. So utilizing that facial recognition system, it really does that automated searching for you. And it really is getting it. I don't want to sound like I'm like, you shouldn't use it. You should use it responsibly if you have access to it and if that's what your department has. But you should also, be able to do the comparison that comes out of it. And I really truly do believe that. But I do think it's a tool that is used And I think that there needs to be a human examiner at the end as well, as well as using the machine. Machines are great, but I think we still need that human in the loop.
Yeah.
Right.
No, absolutely. Especially fields like forensics, of course.
Yeah, for sure. Which, I mean, both can fail, but working together, I think, is the best thing.
Of course. This reminds me of this movie I've seen called The Tourist. So now I'm going to ask you a question that's going to sound like I want to break the law, but I don't. It's on the record.
Angelina Jolie is I'm can't
Yes,
remember.
and
Yeah,
Johnny Depp. Yes, great movie.
that was way back in the archives.
Yeah,
If you could
yeah,
actually see
gotcha.
my face, you would have seen like me computing how far back that was.
Because in the movie, I guess the guy who Johnny Depp plays gets a whole facial reconstruction surgery to get away from the authorities, which
Yeah.
makes my question is, again, because of the movie, not because of me, what
It
is the
was.
minimum amount of like face alteration, in your opinion, do you think you need to be quote unquote unrecognizable?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of like trying to think. It just depends because we've seen where people try to do that with fingerprints, like
Hmm.
maybe burn their fingerprints off or something like that. And it's kind of, it's a little bit comical because it's kind of like, that's crazy. There's so much more minutia around that you didn't
Right.
really know those there that we can use. So there are, I mean, you can do, we talk about this a lot in Iris with like presentation attacks. And so, like, for instance, I wear colored contacts. So I have colored contacts in. If you had a scan of my irises right now, the pattern that's on my irises will match 50, 11 people that are also having different like colored contacts. They all have a mass pattern that's like production of a mass pattern that's on them. But you would still be able to see the detail of my iris inside
Mm.
of the actual colored contact. So things like that, there's still things that we can look at. As far as how much, I don't really know that I'd be able to answer that specifically, just because that is up to the examiner, obviously based on their training, their experience. If they have seen these types of changes before, intentional alterations, things like that. What's the quality of the images? How good was the doctor that you hired? No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, things like that. I mean, I've done comparison. I've done a comparison before that I did not have the evidence to be able to support that it was the same person because I could not get past the details of the nose. And
Mm.
come to find out, they did say, "Hey, our client had a rhinoplasty. They had a nose job. Would you be interested in those photos?" And then once we received those photos, then we were able to come to the opinion that it was a common source, that it was the same person, essentially.
Gotcha. Okay.
So it depends, but if you're looking, you should probably, but pay a good doctor. Do a lot of yeah, the ears would be
I'm gonna go to Turkey. I got you, man.
and I want before and after pictures for training.
Gotcha.
I think that's all the questions we have, and I think we have passed the 45 minutes time because it was so interesting.
It
Oh
was, it was.
yeah, no worries. I would talk about it forever, so it doesn't bother me at all.
I love your job. I'm so excited to learn so much.
Definitely interesting.
I know.
Good, I'm glad.
Okay.
Yeah, if you think of anything else, please let me know. It was really fun.